Hi everyone, and welcome to our demonstration using RSpec and Selenium to test your Ruby builds faster. My name is Ashley Wilson, and I will be hosting, along with Shawn Grove, our senior developer here at Sauce Labs, who will be walking you through writing your RSpec tests and using them with Selenium and Sauce on Demand. So here's our agenda. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview about Sauce Labs. I noticed in the questions that I had you guys answer, some of you guys are not familiar with us, so I'll just tell you a little bit more about that and then toss it over to Shawn Grove. His presentation is about 40 minutes, and then we'll follow that up with a Q&A and also point you to some useful resources. So we should have you out of here within the hour. So a little bit about Sauce Labs. Sauce Labs was co-founded by Jason Huggins, who is the creator of Selenium. He created Selenium while he was at ThoughtWorks in Chicago, and then was hired by Google to use it to test their Gmail and Maps and other applications. For those of you not familiar, I saw that some of you guys are not currently using Selenium. It's a cross-browser automated testing framework. And it's a great tool, but it does have some weaknesses. It can take a long time to run your tests. And it can be hard and tedious to build and maintain a testing infrastructure. So that's sort of where Sauce on Demand comes in. It's our flagship product here, and it lets you run your parallel cross-browser tests in the cloud. So you don't have to worry anymore about setting up all of your different infrastructure in your own company. So we kind of take the overhead out of it. We've been around. Sauce on Demand was released about 9 months ago, so we have a good list of customers here, both big and small, and we're continuing to grow. So why Sauce Labs? Well, we make cross-browser testing easy by lowering the cost of testing infrastructure. As I said, you don't have to deal with servers or maintaining a Windows machine when the whole dev team is on a Mac. We also speed up test execution with Sauce on Demand. You can run your tests in parallel, so it decreases the time it takes to execute your tests. We also enable continuous integration. We have an integration with Kosuke Kawaguchi, the creator of Hudson, so that speeds up your testing time. In addition, we also record and have screenshots of all of your tests. So that's a really great feature for just when you're debugging. You don't have to write up any more reports. You can just send those screenshots or those videos out to your team. We also have our value-added distributions of Selenium, which is Sauce IDE and Sauce RC. They're just simpler to use, and they have some cool features that Selenium IDE and Selenium RC don't have. And then we also offer Selenium support and consulting. We have support packages, but we also, as a free just sort of contribution to the open source Selenium community, we have our forums, and so anyone can write in and ask any questions. And then we also have our help at saucelabs.com. So through this, if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. So as a thank you for showing up today and for providing us feedback on this new project we're embarking on with RSpec and Selenium, I'd like to offer each of you 100 free testing minutes on Sauce on Demand. So all you have to do is go to saucelabs.com/promos and then enter the promo code RSpecWebinar, all lowercase please, and then your account will automatically have 100 minutes. So that offer is going to end in a week. So definitely be sure to check that out. And I should just go ahead and note that we're going to be, this webinar is recorded. So if you need to leave it all, or if you want to tell your friends, we'll definitely be posting it to the Sauce Labs blog probably tomorrow. So here I had you guys answer just a couple of questions when you registered. So here's the breakdown of who is currently writing RSpec tests. 43% of you are not. 52% are, and 5% are planning to. So for those of you who are not, hopefully this demonstration will give you a good introduction and help get you started. Also, this is the experience level with Selenium. 26% of you are advanced, 27% are moderate, 38% of you are beginner, and 9% of you are not currently using Selenium. So Shawn Grove has done a really good job of sort of making this demonstration fit all of your needs. It's going to start out kind of beginner, and then it'll definitely get into more advanced, in-depth stuff. So hopefully each of you will get something out of it. So now I think we're ready to toss it over to Shawn Grove, who is our presenter. As I said, he's a senior developer here at Sauce Labs. He's the creator of SpecStorm, which lets you run your RSpec Selenium tests concurrently. We were just discussing yesterday that we'd like to have a future webinar on that, so definitely stay tuned and check out his GitHub repo and see what you think about that. A quick note about, as I said, we're going to do a Q&A at the end of his demonstration, so you'll see on your little control panel, or the GoToMeeting control panel, that there's a little question box. There's also a chat box. If you could just ask your questions in as the presentation is going on, we'll just sort of keep them in the queue, and then Shawn will ask them as he goes. But please don't feel like you have to wait until the end to hold your questions. There's also the option of raising your hand. People don't seem to like to do this, but there's a little hand symbol. I think it's next to your name. And so if you click on that, and if you'd like to ask Shawn a question directly during the Q&A, feel free, and we can unmute you. So whatever you prefer. So with that, I am going to... Shawn, are you ready?
I am, actually.
Okay, I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right, great. Let me just show my screen here. So thank you for that introduction. Yeah, so as Ashley said, the range of experience is pretty big here. So the goal today is to go through this very quickly, but to start off at a very basic level and get into some pretty advanced stuff. It's going to be kind of a whirlwind tour. So any questions, feel free to ask. And I love kind of having an interactive session where people can explain what they have difficulties with or what they're unclear about. So what we want to get up today, we're going to talk about using RSpec, Selenium, and Sauce Labs. We'll kind of go over a little bit about what RSpec is, what Selenium is, where Sauce Labs fit into that. And then we want to cover a couple of the best practices for writing RSpec tests. Then we're going to take that and take those Selenium tests that we've written in RSpec, run them cross-browser, and then we have kind of a new preview which we're working on recently. All right, so first of all, what is RSpec? For those of you unfamiliar with it, it's a behavior-driven development tool where we are writing our code generally before, or writing our tests generally before we even write the code. It has its own custom domain-specific language, or DSL, for describing tests. If we take a look, we can look at our first test here. That is somewhere in between kind of computer programming language and English. So for those of you familiar with Cucumber, it's a very, very English-like testing language, but it's very verbose. So RSpec hits this kind of very sweet spot between the two, where your tests are still very, very short, very quick to write, very quick to execute, but still very easy and very English-like. So in our first test here, we're using a couple of the RSpec methods. So go ahead and take this out. I'll start with just a very simple example. We're using the RSpec describe command here to describe what we're actually testing. So we're going to be testing a math class in this case. And we're giving it a context. So testing a math class within the context of the addition method. And then we use the it command to start describing its behavior. If you read this backwards, or read this on the chain, it's something along the lines of our math class within the addition method should increase a number on addition. We then go through and we create a value. We assign it to. We create another value and assign it to 2, and then we add the 2 together. For those of you who can do the math, that should be 4. What we do here is then we say that this value should equal 10. If this passes, then something has gone horribly wrong. But the way that we write RSpec tests is generally to write them so that they fail first, before we even write any code. We then run it and verify that it does fail. Then we implement the code, or we fix the code, and then the test passes. So we know that we are testing with the right behavior and that our tests don't pass on some fluke. So if it does break again in the future, if some code is changed internally or there's been updates to the application, then our test, we can be confident that our test will tell us. So if you install the RSpec Gem for Ruby, it gives you a new command called spec. And if we just give it our first example, we'll see that both of our tests failed. So we have two tests. One is saying that it should increase the number on addition, and the other is saying that it should leave a number the same if we add 0 to it. And on the output, we see that we expected to get 10. So here where we said the value should equal 10, but actually we got 4. And that's because 2 plus 2 is 4. So we know our test is failing properly. And it seems reasonable to me that the value should actually be 4. So we'll go ahead and save this. If we notice on the output though, we see math pass addition method should increase a number on addition, failed. So as a developer or as a QA, I'm able to look at this and see immediately which test failed, what value didn't, or what assertion was wrong, as well as the way that the information is presented to me is very English-like. So I know that within my math class, the addition method has an issue. But now that I've updated this test, I'll go ahead and run it once again, and we see that now only the second one failed. This formatter up here, a dot represents a test that has passed, and an F represents a test that has failed. So our first test passed, and our second test failed. And our second test is saying that the addition method should leave a number the same if 0 is added. So we expected to get 0, and we got 2. So if we take a look at our second test here, we see the value is 2, and we add 0 to it. And then we expected to get 0, and it failed. Now we update our tests, and if we run it again, they both passed. So now we can be reasonably confident that we're testing the right behavior. Within here, we know that if we change this assertion, it fails. We've updated our test so that it does match the correct behavior, and now we know that our test is covering the code behavior that we wanted it to. There are a couple of other features that we can kind of hit up. One of them is the formatters. So whenever we run this test, we're seeing the default formatter, which is a progress formatter. Just a period for every test that passes, and an F for every test that fails. The RSpec, by default, comes with several different formatters. So if we pass in a formatter and ask it to output a HTML format, then we can run our test, and we'll go ahead and tell it to output that to the reports. The report HTML file. So if we then open up that HTML file, we can see that both of these tests passed this other way, and everything is green. If we go ahead and change this to, so one of these fails once again, and we rerun that command, and we refresh our HTML output, we see that the output tells us exactly where the test failed, the English description of the test, and then what we expected to see and what we the actual results. So this is kind of a very nice overview for HTML that's able to be sent out to developers on a test failure who aren't necessarily working in the terminal at that moment. So if I'm a developer and I'm sent this HTML file, I can open it up and I see right away what tests are passing, which ones are failing, and I know where I should go and look for that failing test to either update the test or to update my code. So that's our first RSpec test, and we're outputting it to HTML formatter. So from there, we'll go ahead and dive into Selenium a little bit. So as Ashley mentioned, Selenium was created by Jason Huggins while he was at ThoughtWorks several years ago. He was working on a JavaScript-based web application, and he kept going through and manually testing the web application. And he felt that there must be a better way. So he created Selenium, which is a JavaScript library that sits inside of a browser, and it gives you some very cool commands, like scroll to, click on, assert the text is present, etc. And it uses an internal language called Celanese, which is an HTML table-based language, to drive the browser. It's a very unique concept at the time. It's since been championed in several other open source projects. However, one of the weaknesses is that you have to write all of your tests in the Celanese language, which is a little bit finicky and it doesn't give you some flow control like conditional statements, etc. So, thus Selenium RC or remote control was created. In this case, it's a Java file or application that runs on this similar or same computer as your browser, and it takes care of actually launching the browser, injecting the Selenium core JavaScript file inside of it, and then sending the commands from the RC or remote control server to the browser, or rather to Selenium, to control the browser. And this makes sense because of the way that this is written. There are no bindings for virtually every other language or every language out there. So Ruby, Python, Java, etc. Today we're using Ruby, but you could just as easily use Python or PHP. It sends a command to Selenium RC in the language of your choice. This has been translated to something that Selenium in the browser can understand. The result is sent back to Selenium RC, and then that's translated into the language of your choice. So that is an overview, kind of a bird's eye view of how Selenium works and how we're going to be driving the browser from our language. So if we go ahead and take a look at our first script to drive the browser. This isn't RSpec. This is simply Ruby driving Selenium driver. You can see here that we import the Selenium library. We then create a new browser, which is actually a Selenium client driver. And whenever we create it, we give it a localhost, and this is telling it that the Selenium RC is actually waiting here on this local computer. And it's waiting, or listening rather, on port 4444. We then tell it which browser we want to test on, and which base URL that we want to start up in. Then we tell it, all right, if you don't hear anything in 60 seconds, go ahead, something's gone wrong, go ahead and close the browser. Once we started it up, or excuse me, once we've initialized the browser control, we tell it to start a new browser session. We open up the root URL, and if you don't include a full HTTP address, then this is actually going to be appended to this root URL that we have on line 7. Excuse me, line 8 right here. So, although we're just telling it to, we start up a new browser and we're telling it to open up the root URL, this is going to be appended here, so we'll actually open up saucelabs.com/. We then tell it to just wait. So remove the browser and just wait until we hit enter, and then go ahead and close the browser. So in this case, I'm going to start up Selenium RC, or in this case actually Sauce RC, which is our version of Selenium RC. It gives you a graphical user interface with some visual logs, which is quite nice. So you can see here all of the commands that have executed inside of the Selenium RC server. So if we go back to our command line, and we go ahead and run this script. And again, this is a normal Ruby file. This is an RSpec, so we're not using the spec command. So we go ahead and run it, and we look at the doc. We can see that the Selenium RC that's embedded in there reaches out and starts up Firefox and takes care of a couple of tricks to start up in a clean profile. It then just kind of hangs out just waiting for us to give it a command. We hit enter, and it closes. So we've reached out and we've started to just start up a browser and close the browser from within Ruby. But we can do a little bit better than that. So because Selenium actually sits inside of the browser here, and it's a JavaScript-based library, we can actually interact with the web page using arbitrary JavaScript and get the results in the language of our choice. So in this case, it's very similar to the first script that we just looked at, where we're just starting up a new browser, and then we open it. I have a couple new commands. What I've done is I've created a Ruby function called getAllLinks, and this actually executes JavaScript within the browser, and then it returns it in a format that Ruby can understand. So this is going to reach out into the browser, and for the page that we're currently on, retrieve all of the links in a format that we can interact with natively inside of Ruby. So here, the only difference to the sequence of commands is that I open up the root URL, and then I tell it to pause, reach out, get all of the links, display them on the screen, and then close the browser. So very similar from before, except now we're interacting on a closer level to the browser. So once again, we'll start up and run the script. We see that it takes care of reaching out and starting a Firefox. We get our expected prompt that as soon as we hit enter, it's going to execute that native command and give us all of the different links that are on the Sauce Labs homepage. It's going to wait there once again for us to hit enter and then close down the browser. So we're actually reaching out and we're interacting with the web and with the browser directly from within Ruby, which is pretty nice. It's actually very cool to be able to drive a browser in an automatic fashion. So that we've seen our first test in RSpec. We've played around with formatters. We've driven a very, very simple Selenium script. Let's actually combine the two to write a simple test. So in this case, it's a combination of our first script and our last script, where we're importing the Selenium library, importing the RSpec helper for the Selenium library, and we're describing the Sauce Labs homepage text. So go ahead and actually let's take a look at our first one once again. So originally we had these two simple methods here, but RSpec gives you a couple of actual hooks that you can start up and use that are very powerful. So we can tell it before you run any of your tests, do some kind of logic inside of here. So this is the before all tag. So anything inside of this hook here will be run once before any tests are run. So you can see here that it's going to output on being run before anything else. There's also a tag for each. So this means that before you run each one of these, go ahead and run what's inside of here. So we should expect that this before is run once in total, or excuse me, this before all is run once, and this before each is going to be run twice because we have two tests that we want to be run before. So we go ahead and run this updated spec test. We see that our output is indeed that this all is run once, and this each is run once before this failing test and once before the second failing test. So that's exactly what we expected to see, and we're going to take advantage of that in our new script. Before any of our tests are run, we want to set up a new Selenium driver, or browser in this case. We tell it that the Selenium RC server is waiting on localhost 4444. We're going to use Firefox and open up saucelabs.com. So very, very similar to what we were doing before. However, before each test starts, we actually want to bring up a new browser session. And after each test ends, we want to close the browser session. So in this case, we have only a single test, which is that our page, we open the root URL, and then we get the page title, and we say that it should equal, there's no way this will work. So if we remember once again that we're describing the Sauce Labs homepage test, that it should have the same title, and then we say that the title should say there's no way this is going to work. So we'll give that a try. It boots up Firefox. It then reaches out to the Sauce Labs homepage. It gets all the information it needs, and then begins interacting with it from within Ruby. We see that the test failed because we expected there's no way this will work, but instead, on the Sauce Labs homepage, take a look at it. We see it's actually cross-browser testing with Selenium -Sauce Labs. So here's what we actually got, and here's what we expected. And for me, this seems like a reasonable title. I'm going to go ahead and take this title and update my test and run it once again. So it takes care of booting up Firefox, it reaches out to the Sauce Labs homepage, grabs the title, and then asserts that it should equal the new title. So indeed, it does pass. So now we have a test that if our page title ever changes to something different, or is actually a 404 or something along those lines, we'll be immediately notified using this test. Alright, so we have a pretty good founding, a bedrock or a basis to build up our tests from now on. We can add additional tests, but I'm actually driving this on Firefox. I can do that because Firefox is cross-platform and I'm on a Mac, so I have the Mac version of Firefox installed. But it would be really good if I was able to actually interact with a different browser, say Chrome or Safari or ideally Internet Explorer. I can install all those locally to my machine, or I can actually start to use Selenium Grid. This is where Sauce Labs comes in. One of the big advantages is that we're able to test across a lot of different browsers in the cloud. So if we take a quick look at the Sauce Labs architecture, those tests that we've been writing, the RSpec tests and Selenium scripts, they're all sitting on your computer, either as a developer, a QA staff, or on your continuous integration server. All your tests are going to be run just like normal, except instead of using a Selenium RC locally, we're actually going to reach out into the cloud on this Sauce on demand, and we're going to request a machine with a clean version of a browser that we specify. So either Internet Explorer, Safari, Firefox, etc. So we reach out and we boot up one of these machines on the Sauce cloud, and then we actually redirect it to hit our application under test here. This can be behind your firewall. It's a very cool technology to get around that, or it can be a publicly available internet site. So let's see what that actually takes to get that up and running inside of in terms of changing our code. So if we look at our first Selenium RSpec test, we're just creating a driver here, telling it the Selenium RC server is waiting on the local host 44444. All we're going to do is actually change that portion, excuse me, so that instead of telling it look for the Selenium RC server on my local computer, instead reach out to saucelabs.com on port 4444 and use the Selenium RC server that I know is listening there. Instead of just requesting Firefox as our browser, we actually pass in a JSON hash here, which is we give our username and access key. Then we get to specify a couple of options that are very cool. We specify which operating system we want to run on. In this case, we're going to be using Windows 2003. Which browser, in this case Internet Explorer, and which version of the browser. We're going to use 8. We could just as easily use 6 or 7, or Chrome, Firefox, Safari, etc. We're actually taking advantage of this job name, but we'll go into that a little bit later. Let's go ahead and take this out. And we're not using Firefox, we're using Internet Explorer. Other than that, our test is very, very similar to what it was. We should have the same title. There's no way this will work. And we've added 3 more tests here, which is we want to make sure that the page actually contains the word somewhere, or contains the word selenium somewhere in it. And it should also probably contain the word sauce labs. If it doesn't contain that, something has gone wrong. So if we go ahead and run this quick test, you can see I have my Selenium RC server waiting here. I'm going to close that. We don't need it because we're not using it locally anymore. I run this test. If I then go to saucelabs.com and take a look at my active jobs here, you see it load up. You can see here that the test is already running. In Windows 2003, Internet Explorer 8, here's our second test running. If we go ahead and take a look at that, we can watch it running live using Sauce TV, which gives us a window into the machine as it runs the test. In this case, it's going to be using Internet Explorer 8 to open up saucelabs.com and make some assertions, and then close it down. Once that test finishes, the page will automatically refresh, and I'll be given information on how long the test took, what commands were executed, how long each one of those commands took. We get screenshots along the way of what the page looked like whenever we executed that particular command. So if we have a long-running test, we're able to jump through using this screenshot feature. Or we're able to watch the actual video of the test running. So in this case, we see everything from when the browser first starts up, the actual execution of the test, all the way through to the test finishing and closing down the browser. All of this is available via a REST API. So what we see generally is that people will integrate this into the workflow in a way that suits them. We have people who use continuous integration systems that whenever a test fails, there's a person who's responsible for it. And all of this information, including a video, is emailed directly to that developer, so that I no longer have to go to this website or check the logs or anything along those lines. Instead, I'm given a video that will give me hints right away of where I need to start looking to solve this problem. If I need more information, I also have this log, and I can see which of these tests failed and which ones passed. So here we see that both of these tests, just one of these tests failed. It did indeed contain the word selenium. It did indeed contain the word sauce lab. However, the page title was the new page title that we haven't updated this particular test to have yet. So if we go in here once again, we save this test, and we make sure that it has the new updated title. And we run it once again. We can see that it'll go through and test using the new value for the page title. So here we see the test running in the cloud. Alright, so we've taken our RSpec tests and our Selenium script, we've combined the two to write tests using Selenium to drive the actual browsers. And now we've even taken that a step further and driven that into the cloud. We could just as easily, although we're using Internet Explorer 8 here, we could just as easily change this to be, Internet Explorer 6. So all of these tests passed. Let's see if they'll pass in Internet Explorer 6. So here we see this new job pop up right away. And now the tests are going to run against Internet Explorer 6. All right, do we have any questions up to this point?
We've got someone who wrote in and said, would you mind trying this on a site like the NewYorkTimes.com?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So we'll take this test that we just wrote, which was hitting saucelabs.com, and we'll hit NewYorkTimes.com. My guess is that the title of NewYorkTimes.com is not going to be cross-browser testing. It's not going to contain the words Selenium or Sauce Labs. But we'll go ahead and run it using Internet Explorer. We'll do, I guess, probably 7 this time. We've done 8 and 6 already. Sauce Labs, RSpec example, New York Times, and then Explorer in the cloud. So go ahead and run that. We'll take a look at our active jobs page. If we go ahead and watch this, we'll see it open up. NewYorkTimes.com. So here we see the page loading in real time. You see what's happening. And then our test goes ahead and makes its assertion that once this page finishes loading, that the page title should be saucelabs.com. Excuse me, cross-browser testing with Sauce Labs. So it's going to be running the other 2 tests as well. In this case, this is making the assertion that the New York Times webpage should contain the word Selenium. And I would really love, of course, if it contained the word Sauce Labs. That would be awesome. But I think today it probably doesn't have that on the front page. So if we go in here and we take a look at our tests, we see that it actually, the first one failed because we expected to see cross-browser testing with Selenium, and instead we got the New York Times breaking news for this intermediate. The second test failed because we expected that it was able to contain the word Selenium, and actually it didn't. And then sadly, our third test failed because we expected it to contain the word Sauce Labs, and it actually didn't contain those words. It's all right. It's,
one day.
Not yet. We'll get there. All right. So yeah, we could just as easily change this again to be any other browser. Before we dive too deeply into that, we should probably go over a couple of the best practices for RSpec. In this case, we went over the before all and the before each. So if we take a look at our initial example, we have a before all here and a before each. In general, you really want to avoid using before all at all. It leads to very, very brittle tests. In this case, we have 2 tests, one which uses a number and one which adds 0 to it. But let's say this was a slightly more complex example, and we said that instead of describing a math class, we're describing our, let's say, social gardening website. And we said that it should create a new user after sign up. So let's say that within this test right here, I said, all right, for some magic function that creates a user with the title Shawn at saucelabs.com. And then I search that number of users should equal 1. So we've created a new user, and it should be, we should have 1 new user. This test is fine in and of itself. The problem is, if we have this before all, let's say we
let's say we move this so that we were able to access this user in all of our tests. So now we say that in our first test, the number of users should equal 1. And then in the second test, I'm going to say it should change the name on update. So let's say I take that first user, and I say user.name equals Shawn Grove. And user.email equals Shawn, that's someexample.com. Now for my third test, I take this and I say it should create another user on sign up. So finally, I say user, create user, some user at saucelabs.com, and number of users should equal 2. So what's happened here is that each of these tests is fine in and of itself, except that I'm implicitly expecting that by the time it gets down to this third test, on line 17, that there's already a user created, that this first user has a name of Shawn Grove, and that the email is going to be Shawn at saucelabs.com. Each one of these is relying on the state that's left over from the test before. So if I were to run this in the reverse order, say I ran this one first, and I said create user, some user, let's see, find first user. So I'm now pulling out that first user. I'm saying that user.name or user.email should equal Shawn at someexample.com. So now this second test has to run before this third test, otherwise it will fail. I could change this to be, it should equal Shawn at saucelabs.com, but now that means that this second test can't run or before this one, or else the third one will fail. So I've introduced this complexity where each test is relying on the state before. They're interlinked in some way, so we can't run them at the same time. We can't even run them in a different order, or else our tests fail. And we're not testing, and these would be very brittle. However, if before each, instead of before all, I do before each, and I clear out all users. I say I do delete all users, and then I create a new user with the Shawn at saucelabs.com. If this is run before each one of these, now this first test passes, and the number of users will equal 1. Our second test will pass because it'll find the first user, and it'll change the email address. And our third test will still pass as well, because this, even though the second test is run, we're going to recreate that user before we run our third test. So we create a new user, and we will have 2 users total, and our first user will have this state right here. So none of these tests are relying on anything that another test has done. Each of them is entirely self-contained, and that's because we're enforcing that with the before each. Before all tends to lead down this road where you have tests that are very brittle and rely on one another, whereas if you put all of your logic inside of the before each, you tend to write much more flexible and much more self-contained tests. So that's one of the biggest things you're going to want to hit for RSpec. We're using Sauce Labs. We actually have this very cool feature called job name. So in addition to OS, browser, and browser version, you can pass in a job name. In this case, we're using Sauce Labs RSpec example and New York Times. And what this means is whenever I go and look at my past jobs, I may have hundreds or dozens or hundreds, in some cases, easily thousands of jobs here. I think I probably have close to about 10,000 jobs that I've run. If I take advantage of the job naming feature, I can take a look at these. I see that the Sauce Lab RSpec example in Exploring the Cloud failed. I also see that if I was looking for Sauce Lab's RSpec example, New York Times. So if I was looking for this New York Times example that we just ran, I would know immediately where to look inside of my jobs list. If you name your test intelligently and carefully, so if we were to change this to include the time, and rerun that, we can see that now I have an idea that this is the New York Times test that's run against Internet Explorer in the cloud on Thursday, September 30th at 11:46. So name your test intelligently and you'll save yourself a lot of pain down the road. Finally, I'm storing all of my credentials for Sauce Labs directly inside of the source file. This makes it quite brittle and very difficult to update and difficult to spread across the team. If I have several developers who are working on this, we don't all want to be using the same accounts likely. We should be able to take this username access key and move that out of the test into some sort of configuration file. So if we take a look at our test that actually does that, there we go. We're actually going to be loading it from, in this case, a YAML file. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, a YAML file is very similar to a JSON string. And what I've done is created a ondemand.yaml. And this has my username and my API key. So now inside of my test, I'm no longer looking or directly encoding my username and my access key. Rather, I'm giving it, I'm asking it to load the ondemand.yaml file, and then look inside of that file for the username and the API key. So each of the developers can have their own file that's simply loaded up at runtime. Also, this means if either of those change, I simply update my on-demand file, and all of my tests will automatically be updated to using the password and API key. All right, so those are some of the basics in terms of the best practices that are going to lead you down the right path. And we've already seen a little bit of the cross-browser testing manually, where we ran a test against New York Times and saucelabs.com in both Firefox, in Chrome, no, it wasn't Firefox and Internet Explorer 6, 7, and 8. But we had to manually do that. And it would be nice if there was a way that we didn't have to manually specify which of these browsers to test against. We know that we want to test against all the browsers anyway. So Sauce Labs has a very cool REST API. And we'll take a look at this right now. Where if you hit the API, you can actually pull down a list of all the browsers that we support. And this is, you do have to hit the right one though. You have to spell browsers right. Alright, so this returns a JSON object with every combination of browsers that we support. So Internet Explorer on Windows, Firefox on Windows, Firefox on Linux, Chrome on Linux, etc. All the different versions. So we're able to actually pull this down. And this is live from our database. So what happens is, as soon as a new browser is released, say Firefox 4 or Internet Explorer 9, this is automatically updated. So if we run our test against this list that we pull down each time, as soon as a new browser is added to the service, my app is automatically tested against that browser. I don't have to do anything. As a developer, that means that if my test fails on a new browser that's coming out, I'll be alerted before it's even out. So we'll go ahead and do just that. So in this case, we're pulling down that list, the saucelabs.com browser information, and parsing that into a browser's variable. For each of those browsers, we're going through and running our test. In this case, we call it the New York Times homepage test. We're telling it to reach out to saucelabs.com for the Selenium RC server, where we're going to be sending all of our Selenium commands. And instead of opening up saucelabs.com, we're doing New York Times. We're also taking advantage of the job naming feature for the saucelabs RSpec example, but we're also testing in which browser name we're using, which version, and on which operating system. So if we go down, we see that we're running a single test, which is we can find Selenium. It's going to open the root URL, and it's going to assert that the page title is Sauce Labs Selenium-based downloads, hosting, and support. I think we're as good as we're doing. The New York Times probably isn't going to change their title to Sauce Labs anytime soon. So this test is going to fail. But it's going to run against all of those different browsers and tell us which of those browsers it's going to fail on. So we take a look and run this. Let's see where I messed up. See if I'm still connected to the internet. All right, and so this is called the demo guides, and seems like I'm not happy today. But let's see what's going on. So we'll inspect our test a little bit. So it's inside of the Start New Browser section. So we run our original one. Oh, I was actually just running the wrong file. I suppose that is the issue. You do have to run the right file. So you can see here that I went through and created the test for all the different browsers that we're supposed to be testing against. So Internet Explorer 8, 7.6, Firefox, proxy mode, Safari, Google. So we're hitting essentially every possible combination of user that may visit our site. We may want to test on a subsection of this, but this way at least we know that anyone who comes to the New York Times is going to see the same title in all these different browsers. So if we go and look at our in progress page, we see each of these is named intelligently. So let's see. So here is Sauce Labs RSpec example, and then Explorer 8 on Windows 2003. If we go ahead and take a look at that, we can see that the test was run. So we opened the root URL, we got the title, and here's a screenshot of what it looked like whenever the test was run. So that is actually going to take quite a while, because as cool as Selenium is, you're dealing with real browsers, and you have real performance issues. What would be really nice is if we were able to take this test that we've designed in a way that it's not going to clash if we run them in a different order or even at the same time. And we're able to run them in parallel. So that's kind of what we have been working on here. So we cancel out all these different tests. And we'll show you a preview at our new project, where we've been modifying RSpec to actually run these jobs in parallel. So we're going to take this same file, but we have a modified version of RSpec. I'm going to run this in parallel. So go ahead and cancel these. And look at this, it creates all the tests, but instead of running them in sequence, it actually runs them all at the same time. So we'll see an explosion on the jobs page of all the new jobs that are running for our test. So this means that now I'm running that same test on every single browser at the same time. So instead of having to wait for each one of them to finish in sequence and then start the next one, we're going to run them all at the same time
and the test should take roughly as long as the longest individual test case. Our engineers love this example because it usually goes from 0 to running, say, 500 tests all at once, and the system alarm lights go off. So we've taken our RSpec tests, we've written Selenium scripts, and integrated the two, fired them off into the cloud. Now we're running them across every single browser combination all at the same time. And because of the way that we've written it, they can be run at the same time without failing. And also, we're pulling down the list of browsers to run against live. So as soon as, say, Internet Explorer 9 support is added, our test will automatically be run against those without having to change anything. And as a developer, if I'm just set up to receive emails on test failure, I'll automatically get an email if my site isn't supported in Internet Explorer 9. I don't have to go out and change anything. I'll simply be alerted before or whenever the tests start failing. All right, so that is the whirlwind tour from the basics of RSpec all the way up to running your test in massively parallel fashion. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we actually have a number of questions. So let's get to those. So can these tests be run, how would this example be run in parallel? How could these examples you've shown be run in parallel? Would it break the test?
So in this case, because of the way we've written them, they won't be run, or they won't break. They're able to all run, they're all self-contained, and they'll run in a way that, with our modified RSpec runner, that we're looking to open source in the near future, they can all be run in parallel.
Okay. And what about excluding the browsers that you don't need to test on? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, so you could maintain a list internally. So in this case, we're pulling down just the raw list and testing against all of them. You could alternatively have your own version where you, say, have an array of browsers with, browser name is Firefox and etc. Probably the better way that I would do this is I would add a browser, unwanted browsers. And let's say I didn't want to test against Opera. And I'd say browser name is Opera. And then I would do a browsers each. And I would have, if the unwanted browsers contains the current browser name, then delete browser. So what this would do is loop through, we pull down that live list, but we have a filter here of unwanted browsers, and we just loop through that browsers list that we pull down, and we say, if this list contains the browser with the name Opera, go ahead and just take it out. We don't want to test against that. So by the time we run our test, it won't contain anything or any of the Opera browsers. So this can all be done within the script. And that's probably a good idea to add that to the standard RSpec sauce GitHub repo with just a filter of unwanted browsers. So I'll go ahead and add that to my to-do list for updating the RSpec sauce examples.
Okay, great. You also talked about, when we were talking about sauce on demand, being able to just email developers directly with the results. How do you specify the email addresses that the test reports are sent to when using sauce on demand?
So
Sauce on Demand, so as it stands currently, we don't actually integrate, or we don't send the emails ourselves. It's kind of a cool idea in some direction that we're heading. But the way it generally works right now is that people will run the test from their continuous integration server. And whenever the test fails, it's set up within that server to email the person on the blame list. So internally, we use both Hudson and BuildBots. And what happens is, whoever made the last commit is added to a possible blame list. And whenever the test fails, they're the ones who are sent to the email saying, hey, you made the last commit and now this test fails. You might want to be aware of this. So it's all handled kind of internally to the on the developer side.
Okay, great. This is a question. Someone was wondering, in the demo you used objects like page to get the title. Where is the object page coming from?
So, if we take a look at our example here, it's actually an alias for Selenium driver. So if I go ahead and change this to be browser, or excuse me, page, so whereas previously we're using browser, in this case we actually switched to calling it page. I like browser to be honest, but the default is page. So let's go ahead and change this to be browser. So the browser is this Selenium browser running in the cloud, and we're saying instead of the page title, we're telling it browser.open and browser.title should equal. So the object is actually just an instantiation of the Selenium driver, and you can name it whatever you're most comfortable with.
Okay. Do we have any good resources of running with and against JS libraries such as jQuery?
So there are different kinds of tests. So there are unit tests and functional tests. If you're writing unit tests for, say, you want to verify that the behavior of your, the logic of your JavaScript is correct, then there are a couple of very cool tools. For example, vows.js, which is similar to RSpec for Ruby, except it's kind of a RSpec for JavaScript. And this allows you to just test the logic of your JavaScript. Not necessarily against different browsers, but just that your JavaScript is correct. Selenium is very good for testing, for functional testing, where you hit a page and you don't necessarily care what libraries it's using, what language it's written in, but you want to assert the behavior of the page. So you know that regardless of if I'm using prototype or jQuery, a new user should be created whenever a new user signs up. So using Selenium, it's very easy to test that kind of functionality.
Okay, great. Shawn, do you know anything about integrating with TeamCity?
So we don't have any official integration with TeamCity right now. We have integration with Hudson, and we have some pretty exciting stuff happening, I think, on the 13th. Had last amazing announcements and pretty cool stuff we're going to do. TeamCity is very high on our radar. We have customers who have already integrated with custom solutions, but we don't have a standard one yet. We're very eager to kind of work with people and figure out what is the common workflow among them. So I know that several people have already written in to us and kind of started offering their own solutions. So we're working on standardizing that and offering that as kind of a drop-in integration right now.
Yeah, and if you'd like to follow up with that and just give us any ideas about it, just feel free to email help@saucelabs.com. Like you said, we'd be interested in hearing more.
We're very much looking for user feedback and user-guided development in terms of what you guys are looking for a Soft City solution.
Great. Someone has a question about getting access to this sample test code. Is like the Big Bang RB in your GitHub repo, or?
This is all on GitHub under my Cucumber versus RSpec sauce. There's a similar repo for Cucumber and several other testing frameworks. I don't think I have the Big Bang one in there. I believe this will run it. This is just has a single example, so I'll go ahead and update that with the browser filter and kind of everything that we saw today as well. For running them in parallel, that's going to take a little bit more work, and we have to release that as probably a Ruby gem as a modification for the RSpec library a little bit later.
Yeah, and like we said earlier, just so you guys know, once he updates this, we'll be posting the recorded video of this to the web, so it'd be really easy to follow along. We should have that up to our blog later today. So, Shawn, would you like to discuss a little bit more about some of the challenges of running tests in parallel? Are there any concurrency issues that might come up? And also, do we have documented guidelines specifically about this?
It's actually a pretty interesting problem domain. It's definitely, there are a lot of interesting challenges that one can face. Whenever you start interacting with data and changing data, tests that are run concurrently are going to step on one another's toes unless there's some sort of sandboxing mechanism. We have a plugin for Rails called SpecStorm, and what this allows you to do is run these RSpec linting tests in parallel if you're using a Rails app. And each of those tests will run concurrently, but they'll hit the website as if they were the only browser using it at that time. So they all get their own sandbox to run in. So you get to run them in parallel, but they never see the effects of another browser just running at the same time. For applications that aren't written in Rails, for example, Java applications have a couple of very cool features that are like this. If you're running from within testing G, it's very good at running in parallel and maintaining sandboxes. But outside of those select few tools, there's a lot of kind of mental management going on. You have to know which tests can be run without, at the same time, without stepping on one another's toes. So it's probably a very, I would imagine that's an entire webinar in and of itself. We don't have any standard documentation on it right now, but I definitely think that that's a good idea.
Okay. Does Sauce IDE support RSpec?
Sauce IDE does export to RSpec. You can't run RSpec tests from within the IDE, but you can record your tests within the IDE and then export to RSpec. It'll look a little bit different from what we have set up here today, but you could integrate that and start building up your own library so that the tests that are exported kind of tie into this framework seamlessly.
Okay. And for QAs who might not know what the functions are called, such as like create, use your in your example, how should they best handle that?
So actually, I think this is like the Selenium RSpec crossover is very nice for QAs because it's not about calling internal functions anymore. Right? I should never reach into the database and set up a user myself. Instead, I'm going to say, it can create a new user, and I would say app browser.open, say my sign-up page. And there's a lot of best practices around here as well that you want to be careful about, but if we just flush it out very quickly and say browser.type, name, so in this case, I don't have to know the internal function name. Rather, I'm interacting with the website just as a user would, just as I would as a QA. So I can create a test that would do that. But I may want to create a user several times over. So I can actually take this and start to use this outside of it. So I can create a new function called create user. That this is my own library that I'm starting to build up. And within this create user, I go through and execute these commands. And now inside of my test, I can say, all right, create a user. And then say, for example, it can delete a user. I'm going to say, all right, create a user. And then open the unsubscribe page. And, oops. And click on unsubscribe. So I don't have to know any of the functions that the developers are handling. Instead, I'm building up my own library and my own way of interacting with the website. This is also very nice because now that this is abstracted, say this changed, and now there's a new field that I have to put in my email address. I update this function in place once, and now all my other tests automatically did that. I don't have to go through and update each one of these tests because it's all abstracted to one method or one function that I've created, and that will allow me to test my site very quickly and update these tests so they remain very flexible.
Great. So one of our attendees is able to get these examples and the test to work in the cloud, but not on certain browsers due to Selenium RC issues. Is this something that we would patch, or that the community at large will need to do with a release?
Is that it's not working on Sauce on Demand?
It says it's able to work in our cloud, but not on certain browsers. Google Chrome and Safari being examples. Yeah,
so I think in those cases, we actually work very closely with the Selenium community and the Selenium project. We've been making a lot of modifications and releasing them in the wild. We have a couple of changes that we're going to make around the way that Google Chrome is launched, Opera, and new versions of Safari. We're going to fix that. It's on the top of our radar right now, and then we'll release that back to the community, definitely. We have some very, very cool stuff happening where we're actually starting to extend Selenium in some interesting ways. So you can click on pop-ups that are not JavaScript based. You can upload files in, for example, Internet Explorer and Internet Explorer 8, Safari, etc. And we're working on, or we're kind of visualizing ways to return that to the community and kind of figuring out how is that going to work.
Great. Looks like one of our last questions. As a .NET developer, what are the benefits for installing Java, Ruby, and other language you need to run a test when all you need are the net languages?
So, if you only want to work in .NET, then there's not going to be much benefits. So, .NET has some very, very cool features. I'm very impressed with the common language runtime, etc., and the dynamic language runtime that's good as well. However, I think for writing tests, it's generally, especially functional web tests, it's not the ideal for me. It's kind of a to each his own approach. So if you're using .NET, then RSpec, and you don't want to Python or use Ruby as your testing language, and it's probably not going to be an advantage to use RSpec. You can still drive Selenium from directly within the .NET language of your choice, though.
Great. Here's one more question. Why are these open source projects, such as like RSpec Runner, released to the community as opposed to involving the community?
In what way?
Well, as opposed to like just a repo and GitHub that people can, I guess, contribute to as an ongoing maybe community project rather than a release and then a response from the community?
Well, in this case, what happened was we had some people who were using RSpec. I'm a big Ruby guy myself. I wanted it to work, so I looked up these projects for RSpec, Cucumber, Rails, etc., and I put them out there. If people want to fork that on GitHub, you can simply go to the repo, and there's a button up here. I don't have it because this is mine, but you can just click on fork. That'll make your own copy of this. If you make a patch, then you can just tell me to pull it, and I'll integrate it into the repository. So any changes the community wants to make, we're very happy to include that. I'm personally very big on the open source movement. So anyone who wants to contribute back, I'll be totally psyched.
Check out Shawn's GitHub repo. Email him or myself. He's at Shawn@saucelabs.com. I'm at Ashley@saucelabs.com, or also webinars@saucelabs.com. We'll be able to get that. And again, so the promo code is just saucelabs.com/promos. And it's RSpec webinar, all lowercase, so that'll give you 100 testing minutes. So we definitely encourage you to do that. And as we said, this will be recorded and posted to the blog later today, and Shawn will update all of his GitHub stuff. So hopefully you'll be able to follow along. And yep, we'd just love to hear your feedback, and just let us know how it all goes. So thanks so much. See you guys later.